Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another broadcast of Legally Speaking. I'm Stephen Futerall. I'm an attorney in Charleston, South Carolina, and I am joined by my charming co-host, Tina Willis, in Orlando, Florida. Before we get down to the show's guests and program, I want to give a quick shout-out to our friends over at Rocket Matter. They are the leading cloud-based solution for small to mid-sized law firms. If you're looking for a better practice management solution, you should look no further than Rocket Matter. To learn more, go to rocketmatter.com. Now, normally, Tina, you know, this is the part where I flash my Rocket mug. But, Jeffrey Bean, if you are watching today, you may covet my R2D2 drinking mug. Wait for it. You ready? With the lid? It's coffee and a conversation with R2D2. Yes, I'm a Star Wars fan. So
where did you get that?
Eat your heart out. You can get it at Hallmark, by the way. And no, they're not a sponsor. So anyway, Tina, how are you today?
I am doing great. I've just been staying super busy and just excited about today's conversation to learn. I mean, this is a obviously emotional topic and compelling and interesting, and I'm so looking forward. I've never met Christopher Pearsall, which I'm excited to do, and Dr. Jen, our other guest. I had seen her before on an HOA, and she was just fantastic. And right away, that's when we actually, contacted her about this show. So I'm just looking forward to hearing the discussion and maybe learning a few things myself. So how are you up in South Carolina?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. And today we're discussing two of my favorite topics, sex and law. So it's all good. And to help us discuss those two particular topics, first I want to introduce everybody from out in California. This is Dr. Jennifer Gunsaullus. Dr. Jen, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. For those of you who don't know Dr. Jen, she is a sexologist. Doctor, what is a sexologist? Exactly?
Good question. It's a kind of catch-all term that we use. I use it specifically. My training is as a sociologist. I have my PhD in sociology with a specialty in sex and gender. And I have a private practice with individuals and couples around sex, relationship, intimacy, communication. I also do a lot of public speaking about sexual health, intimacy, mindfulness, writing, videos. I have a whole video series in the Den with Dr. Jen. So my specialty area is sex and educating around that and helping folks feel more just empowered and satisfied and happy and healthy.
Well, that sounds like something we could all use, right?
Yes.
So that's a good thing. Tina, you want to introduce Chris?
Well, Christopher Pearsall is a family law attorney from Rhode Island. He has become just an animal on Google Plus in the last few months. If you haven't seen him, you've been hiding under a rock somewhere. But we've been planning on also having him on for quite a while. We just had guests lined up, but I'm just excited to meet him today. I know he works very hard for his clients. He posts on a fairly regular basis about the extra diligence that he goes through, and he describes it, and I can tell that he does really care about his clients, which is, in my book, the most important asset for an attorney. Like if I was looking to refer a case, that's what I want to know. So I think he's great, and he's here, and I know you both are family law attorneys and are going to share, your insights about how infidelity impacts the legal process, if it does, and I know that in many ways it doesn't, but anyway, we'll get into all that. So, but Chris, how are you doing? And is this your first hangout on air, or?
It is, Gina. I'm doing really great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Very excited to be here.
So basically, we have topics regarding sex, and Chris is a virgin on HOA. So this is, you see how this all, Jennifer and Tina, it all comes in full circle. So
I feel so honored to be a part of this.
Well, Chris and I have had an opportunity to engage on Google+, and one of the things, as Tina mentioned, that I do is family law, and I'm sure Chris can attest to this. It's a difficult area to practice law. Not that they all aren't difficult to some degree, but obviously when you're dealing with family law, you're dealing with broken families, children caught in the middle, broken hearts, broken finances. Very few aspects of family law are in any way, well, no one wants to be in family court unless they're adopting a child, in which case it's a happy day. So for today, considering how many marriages end up in divorce and how many of those divorcing couples are facing issues of whether their partner was unfaithful to them during the relationship, we thought this would be a good topic to discuss, both from the legal side, hence the reason why we've got Christopher Pearsall here to engage with us, and also from the less legal or the real world side, if you will, and that's why we have Dr. Jen with us as well. So thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
I had posted some things regarding this, sort of jumping into the discussion here, and I wanted to pose a question both to you, Dr. Jen, and to you, Chris. Something I get asked, Chris, I don't know if you do, and Dr. Jen, I'm sure you do. How can you tell if your spouse is cheating on you? So, being a Southern gentleman, ladies first. Dr. Jen, what's your thought on that?
It's, the first thing that came to mind is sketchy behavior. But, if you're particularly a suspicious person in the first place, that can, work against you. But I would say, how can you tell when folks come in? Sometimes I've had somebody come in separately, like a husband come in and his wife isn't with him, but they're having some problems and things are going on, and he starts listing off different behaviors, and I was like, hate to tell you, but I think she's cheating on you. And I'm pretty much always accurate with that. And it's behavior, particularly around technology these days. Is somebody on their phone a lot more, texting or doing stuff? Are they just spending more hours away in an office on, on a computer? Are they hiding their phone? Are they turning it away from you? Do they have, suddenly have a code on their phone that they didn't have before? Those types of things, and being very defensive a lot of times. I find that when somebody is doing something out of integrity with their word and their marriage or relationship, they often get very defensive and will quickly blame the other person. It's because they're feeling guilty. So that's my first pass at that topic.
Interesting, by the way, before we turn it over to Chris, that you should mention the use of technology in phones, because I see that and hear that a lot in my practice, where that is probably one of the biggest suspicious behaviors they see. It's not something as obvious as setting up their own separate bank accounts or something more cliche like coming home with lipstick on their collar, but spending time on the computer and phone and being very secretive about it seems to be a trend. Chris? How about you?
Well,
what do you tell clients? What are the signals that you see from dealing with clients in this vein that are sort of dead giveaways that a spouse may be cheating?
Well, first of all, I want to know how Dr. Jen got my list. you mentioned every single thing that I have on my list.
I think they call it the heartbeat.
I did want to be prepared. I think I need an R2-D2 mug at this point. But I think she hit on just about everything as far as whether or not you can tell that your spouse is cheating. The defensive-ness, if you're asking a question, if you have a particularly high sex drive with your spouse and suddenly it decreases. That might be an indicator as to whether or not they might be out somewhere else, whether their demeanor changes.
Chris, it's either that or lower back pain. I'm sorry, I just had to throw that in there.
She's right. But I mean, other than that, I mean, there are certain ways you can find out if they're cheating, rather than just being able to tell. One of the things could be looking at credit card receipts if you have access to them and seeing different charges, looking at your telephone bill to see if there's any particular numbers that keep coming up over and over and over again for particular lengths of time. Texting, has texting increased? Has it decreased? Just like Dr. Jen said, if there are passwords that have suddenly been used, technology has really become a huge factor in I think, a tool that can be used for marital breakdowns. And I think that's one thing that people need to be aware of. But certainly paying attention to the mannerisms of your spouse and whether they suddenly change, that's a big one.
Yeah. I know Tina's got some questions here, but Tina, I wanted to throw something up from Greg Trulio saying that his fiance is going to go to a digital art school, and should he be concerned about her sketchy behavior? Greg, here's the thing. If she's drawing nudes on a regular basis, then the answer is probably yes. Probably yes.
Oh, that's excellent.
So.
All right. Well, so we don't have any other indicators, just technology and sketchy behavior. See, Greg, drawings and stuff now.
Well, if I can throw in on this, y'all, the one thing is I think what the takeaway is from both Dr. Jen and Chris is when they start behaving outside of their norms, because we have our routines, we do things generally the same, and then you might get suspicious because your spouse decides to join a gym or they're getting more fit and so on. And of course, in and of itself, that may not be an issue. But all of a sudden, you notice that all sorts of things start to change. Their routines, their schedules, and so on. And I'd say for most folks, if you haven't generally been a suspicious person during your relationship, but all of a sudden your suspicions are raised, you kind of have to go with your gut on that one. Dr. Jen, what do you think?
I absolutely agree. Yeah, because and where it's interesting sometimes, I've talked to couples where one of them ended up cheating, and that they had grown so distant at that point that's kind of how they get away with it, because they're just going about their routines and they're not connecting that much and they're not sharing that much about their day, or they haven't been intimate. So but even in those situations, usually when I check back with the person that had been cheated on, there were little signs, but because they just didn't have that open communication and connection already, or that had deteriorated over time, they just didn't bring it up, or they didn't address the topics. So yeah.
Sure.
And well, for you guys, for the family law attorneys, you guys, both of you, so how would you tell someone, like, if they wanted to confirm? I mean, they have suspicions. You're telling them if they're doing sketchy behavior and all that. But don't you? If they want to confirm, do you maybe tell them to go get an investigator, or do you just tell them, what to do if you're suspicious but you don't know?
Well, I mean, from my point of view, you can't really, without an investigator, someone to actually confirm it, short of finding sequences of text which confirm it, or emails that confirm it. It's kind of hard to come out and tell a client your spouse is cheating on you without some sort of confirmation that, frankly, they've probably already received. If they haven't received it, you might be able to direct them to that. For instance, you can ask them whether or not they have access to their spouse's phone, or access to the email account, whether they both use the same email account, because strangely enough, there are spouses who do cheat and who do commit adultery, and yet they have an open account where they both use the account, whereas maybe the wife doesn't use it that frequently, but the husband does, and he never thinks, oh, she'll never be on here, she's hardly ever on here, she'll never see this, or I'll put it in a folder and she'll never even notice it, or I'll name it something name the folder that has absolutely nothing to do with cheating, and she'll never know. Well, by being an attorney,
you're not naming the folder extramarital affair pictures.
Never open this file, secret.
Yes, my eyes only.
I guess what I meant, though, well, that's a great point, though, but what I meant was, do you often tell people they should hire an investigator? And I know that it may or may not have much relevance legally, but if someone really wants to know, I mean, is it common for people to actually hire an investigator, or is that like just stuff that's in the movies? And I mean, I know it happens, but is this something that happens often, or?
Well, if I can jump in here for a second, and Chris, I'm assuming your experience is the same. The answer is yes. I mean, private investigators get involved because in most states, like for example, and I'm curious, Chris, in Rhode Island, what it takes. In South Carolina, they don't want couples to come in and claim somebody is cheating on the other one to get a quickie divorce. They call that collusion. So in order to get a divorce in South Carolina, you have to prove it. And one of the ways of doing that, there may be overwhelming proof like what Chris is talking about, you know, photographs, texts, and that sort of thing going back and forth. But otherwise, you'd hire a private investigator. Now, not every case warrants a private investigator. And what I tell people is, if you have just a suspicion that your spouse is cheating on you, but you don't know where they're going or who they're with, it's going to cost you a small fortune. You can start typically with tracking devices. Each state is different in terms of whether that is legal or not. I've had clients show up at my office where I've actually, if I'm dressed in jeans and whatnot, go under there with a mirror and show them where there's a tracking device showing that they came to my office. You'd be amazed.
Wow.
But for each case, it's different. If it's a case with no assets, no children, etc., why spend thousands trying to get a faster divorce when there's, economically speaking, it doesn't make sense? It might help you emotionally, right, Dr. Jen? That might be something that they want to confirm.
It's interesting, yeah, because I come from a really different perspective on this, because, you know, I come from the perspective of, okay, we're trying to hold your relationship together here. Usually, if they're coming to see me, now occasionally I do help people through separations and things like that, but usually it's a different motivation for coming to me. So I can't imagine that I would ever encourage somebody to put a tracking device on something or even hire a private investigator, because once you cross a line like that, whether the person's doing it or not, your marriage is probably done with in terms of ever, in terms of trust and things like that. So if you're going to go down that path, boy, you better be ready to be done with your relationship. And if that's the case anyway, then
what's the point?
Yeah, exactly. Now, what's the point?
Chris, I'm wondering, I wanted to ask you now, I have talked some clients out of a divorce. And I don't mean pressured them, but actually encouraged them to reconcile even when these kinds of issues were going on. And happy to report that I know of several couples who are years later still married to this day. I don't know how happy they are, but still married to this day.
You didn't send it to Dr. Jen.
Yeah, I sent it to Dr. Jen. Have you ever encouraged a client to reconcile, not to get a divorce, even for a cheating spouse?
There's only one case that I can think of where, when it's been a cheating spouse, I've encouraged it. I know I do encourage them to seek counseling to see whether or not they're capable of reconciling. They should go to a competent therapist and try to determine that way, to determine whether they're the kind of person, based upon what they know, whether or not they're even capable of moving on, forgiving, and well, you don't ever forget, but forgiving and still moving forward, having a positive relationship. But I frequently go through, when clients come, I try to suss out whether or not are they there. Are they really at the point where they are ready for a divorce or not? When there's a cheating spouse, it becomes more and more so that, yeah, they're pretty much there, but some spouses love their spouse so much that they will try. And there have been a couple cases where I've recommended it, and frankly, I don't see them again. So I assume that they got back together again.
Yeah. Well, we have
a question. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, you go ahead. We'll come back.
We can ask his question too, but what do these tracking devices look like? Like you mentioned this, I'm sure I didn't have one.
It literally looks like a little black box. If the investigator...
I'm fascinated with this.
It looks like a little black box. A few of them actually have a little light on them, which is kind of a telltale sign that it's a tracking device. That's not a good design. But the more crafty ones I've seen is when the investigator has a set of keys to the vehicle and actually installs the device somewhere in an engine compartment. Makes it very difficult to find. Otherwise, they're simply throwing it up under the chassis of the vehicle, and it's strapped on magnetically. And what I tell clients who find that, go, by the way, if you have been cheating, don't throw that thing into a lake because it's about $500 and you're going to get court ordered to pay for that too. So don't get frustrated and toss that thing on the side of the road. So anyway.
Okay, so you posted a question from Christopher Vogelman.
Well, we've got one thing was before we get to Chris, Ken Montville was asking, is cheating grounds for divorce? Adultery is grounds for divorce in South Carolina. Chris, how about in Rhode Island? Is it still grounds for divorce?
It's not only grounds for divorce, it's still criminal here in Rhode Island.
Yeah,
oh, really?
And technically it's criminal here too, but of course, we're in South Carolina. It would be criminal. But having said that, nobody gets.
It's really strange because it's different in every state. But in Florida, you don't need to even, irreconcilable differences is grounds for a divorce. So I mean, you don't, and it actually doesn't even affect division of assets unless there was, what's you guys know the phrase. Basically, unless the person spent money on the affair out of the marital assets.
Gotcha.
There's a phrase for that, but in any event.
Chris Vogelman had asked, what are the characteristics of or background of a good PI, private investigator? Guys, we want to kind of get back to the topics we were discussing, but Chris, do you have anything you want to share regarding what you think makes a good PI before we move on to some other issues?
Not in particular. I mean, first of all, you should look at some of their work product if possible. Make sure they can spell. If they can't spell in their report, that isn't a person you want to hire. Find out how long they've been doing it. Make sure they are licensed.
Yep, that's pretty much it. I go with locally. I talk to other lawyers. We share information about the investigators we use, those we find that have integrity, do a good job, do it timely, and charge a fair price, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah. Well, you want me to move on to the next question, or?
Sure, absolutely, okay. Please.
Awesome. So the next question, you guys, is whether if you know that your spouse has been cheating, whether to confront them from a practical and legal standpoint. So we started with Jen, and she got all of Chris's answer. Maybe we should go with Chris this time.
Oh, okay. I didn't get her list. I don't have her list.
No, but she gave all of the same answers you were going to give on the first question.
I understand. So should you confront them if, in fact, they're aware that they're cheating? If a client were to come to me and ask me, well, should I confront them about it? Frankly, I would generally say no at first, because there are certain things that I would want to make sure about the client to find out whether or not they might be financially secure, whether or not they can protect themselves before they go and announce this. Because in some cases, depending upon how adversarial things get, a spouse can go in, and if it's a joint bank account, and say, for instance, the wife doesn't work, some men don't hesitate to go in once they've been found out and clean out the bank account. They may not want the spouse to have any kind of resources in order to hire an attorney to do what's necessary. So once a cheating spouse has been found out, it may be necessary to take precautionary measures. Are both spouses on the bank account? Who has access to the charge cards? Who's on the charge cards? Does the spouse have the resources in order to go and hire an attorney? And could the other spouse cut them off from any and all resources from doing so? So, in a nutshell, there are a lot of people who say, oh, I know my spouse. They'd never do this to me. Well, I can tell people that with all the people I have met over the years, hundreds and hundreds of couples, that you just never know. Once they've been confronted or once they may have been served papers, the kindest school marm can turn into Carrie.
Oh, God. That's scary.
It's entirely possible.
Scary.
It is true. You probably can look around and not be a lawyer and see friends and family who've done the same thing, and they're divorce. And that kicks it back to you, Dr. Jen. As lawyers, we like Chris, I would tell my client not to confront their spouse, but we both know that's basically like telling them not like, what was it, don't look back at the city, Sodom and Gomorrah. Everybody's turning into a salt lick because they had to, or don't look at the eclipse. They're going to look at it. So don't confront don't confront your spouse over their cheating ways. We all know they're going to do that. Is that a good idea? And if you were going to confront them, what's the best way to go about it?
Like the law, and it sounds like the law and psychology are like the opposite on so far.
Very much so.
And it's the difference again, right? Folks are hopefully coming to me because there's still at least a shred of hope, because they still want to be with this person. So, all right, I take the opposite of a not, antagonistic approach with the assumption of how if you're gonna confront your partner, which I do think is a good idea, sort of gathering your evidence, gathering your thoughts, but doing it in a calm way. And if you can't do that, then wait. But I mean, like, don't use it as an excuse to go batshit crazy on your partner, because that's like not going to help anybody or yourself. And I know some people, use it as an excuse. I mean, certainly, be angry and stuff like that, but honestly, if folks were able to do this, and not everybody has kind of the emotional skills, and especially in a situation like this that's so heated, to do it, but the best type of approach would be to go to your partner and be like, hey, I know we haven't been close recently, or I know we haven't been talking, and you've been asking for this and I haven't been doing it, or whatever, and like actually come from a really vulnerable place of just sort of ownership of like, things haven't been great between us, and I'm kind of getting a sense that you may be up to something else. Can we talk about this? Like, what's going on? Now, like I said, a lot of people don't have the skills to do that and will just freak out, but if you actually really want to clear the air and find out what's going on, the more responsible you are in your approach, the better off. And I think the less likely the other person will be to get defensive and just want to lie right away.
Well, Dr. Jen, I want to ask you which scenario, for lack of a better term, might be better. Say you believe your spouse is cheating. Say you even have evidence in your mind that your spouse is cheating. Now, for me personally, if I were going to confront my spouse over cheating, I'd rather them come forward to me. I don't want to play mind games with them, but I'd rather them voluntarily share that, because that at least tells me that they're trying to at least change their ways and be above board and hit the issue head on, versus going straight to them and going, I know X, Y, and Z, which of course at that point they're either going to dig their heels in and lie further, or having been caught, then they're going to go ahead and reveal themselves. Do you see my point? Which is better? Let them come to you?
Well, it's funny because you're reminding me of like somebody was sharing me recently. They were in like a car with their two kids or something, and they started bringing up the topic, I think, of something about honesty and hiding things and not telling lies, and they just put it out there, and their kids
big barn door or something. Yeah.
Their kids just started squirming, and that they're just going to start sharing stuff because they felt so guilty. So, I mean, there is an aspect of perhaps approaching like your partner like in a kind way, like I said, and then been like, you're up to stuff. I know you're up to stuff. You're not being honest with me. I'm just gonna let you sit with that right now, and and then we're gonna come back and talk about this. I mean, and maybe give your partner some time, and I'd say, reiterate the fact is you're with this person. You loved them at some point, and you still may now. You very well have children together. You have lots of, you've created a life together and had a lot of good times. Just to throw it out the window like that without some respect and conversation with each other, I don't think serves anyone. So, sort of a softer approach in that way, I think, would be better.
Can I ask, do you see a lot of couples successfully get through this?
Yes, and I'm glad you asked that. It's so interesting, but and I think the research supports this as well, although I don't have any statistics. Folks that are willing to work through an infidelity and really want to and are committed to often end up happier in their marriages and relationships than they were before. Now, it takes a lot of work, but the reason is because things weren't working generally in one way or another, or things weren't being communicated, or the sex wasn't fulfilling, or all these other things, or the emotional maturity wasn't there. And if you're going to work through this and talk through this and be vulnerable and put it all out on the table, and you've got nothing to lose, and build new skills for communication based on this and hitting rock bottom, folks end up much closer and happier and more fulfilled than they were before the infidelity.
Does that, we had a question from Christopher Vogelman, but Dr. Jen, I think you answered it there. Chris wanted to know whether it's true the leopard never changes its spots. In other words, once a cheater, always a cheater.
I don't agree with that. However, I do believe there's certain personality types that people have that will make them more likely to cheat. And in particular, you know, there's some interesting research looking at men and are they naturally cads or dads? And it's in terms of sort of their wiring and in terms of their receptors around this vasopressin, which is like a neurochemical in terms of are they bonding with their partners, or are they always sort of out looking for something new and more exciting? And so, and I do think physiologically.
You mean all men? Are you talking about all men or just certain types of personalities?
Yeah, well, they found some differences. They believe physiologically in men, in certain men, right, and that they're more likely to do long-term pair bonding versus, you know, maybe they want that monogamy, but they're just not going to be so good at it. Yeah, and so I do think there can be differences in that, and certainly, you know, just personality factors, past experiences. If you've been cheated on, you know, do you live a exciting lifestyle? You know, are you in the spotlight in your life and you feel entitled to be able to sleep with other people? You know, I see that more with sometimes lawyers and doctors.
Wait a minute.
Sorry, guys.
Now I got my finger on the eject button there. I'm just teasing. You're probably right.
If there is, there can be personality types, but I do think a number of the times that it's happening in relationships, it's because the emotional communication isn't there, the vulnerability, the comfort, the one partner saying, say it's the man saying, I really do need sex, I really need it to connect with you and be close, and the partner just has a low sex drive and doesn't get that's literally how their partner feels loved and cared for and connected. It's not just sex, it's not just the physical act and release. And so once they can get on the same page with that and start rebuilding, okay, how do we create a sex life with, say, a high desire person and a low desire person, and how do we redefine desire and start with a blank slate and really recreate intimacy in so many new ways? I think that can, even if somebody cheated, I think that can definitely, keep them on track and committed.
Well, if we may, and Dr. Jen, hoping you can address issues of how to rebuild trust, but before we get to that, how about we kick it back to Chris for a legal perspective. Chris, okay, we're talking about taking your cheating spouse back, okay, or better stated, reconciling with your spouse. Good or bad, right or wrong, you've made that decision. What happens in Rhode Island? I know what happens here in South Carolina, but legally, what happens then?
Well, in Rhode Island, if you've taken back your cheating spouse, it's probably the same concept that you have in your state. It's condonation. And in the state of Rhode Island, if you take back your spouse and you try to go forward with them, then you can't later on use that as a fault grounds and say, hey, I'm going to divorce you based upon adultery.
Gotcha. Well, here in South Carolina, Chris, same thing. You take your spouse back, you forgive them. It's called condonation. Now, specifically, you can only forgive what you know. So, if there are other partners, other acts that you didn't know of, there can be an argument made legally. I can't forgive what I don't know about. But one thing I would suggest out to those folks from a legal perspective, if in your state condonation is an issue, what I tell my clients is we probably need to talk about coming up with a post-nuptial agreement or with some sort of settlement agreement before you decide having relations with your spouse again. If anything, that is a way of trust building, because then the cheating spouse is showing you that they're not trying to get back with you to sort of overcome whatever legal claims you are. They genuinely want to be back with you, take care of you financially. Here's what we'll do with the kids. Now let's focus on our relationship now that the legal aspects are out of the picture. So Dr. Jen, how do you build trust again?
Yeah, and trust is that's the interesting thing, that that's the sense of betrayal is usually the heaviest thing for somebody to get over, because they've been lied to, because they were going about their lives and all this stuff was going on behind the back. So that's the biggest one. And I talked about before, the process of regaining trust is both people being very vulnerable in new ways, being very transparent. I set up things like weekly check-ins with folks, and specifically like, okay, I like to sometimes quantify things that are really abstract, like trust, for example. So if I had a couple have a weekly check-in, and one of the things they're checking in with is trust, literally put it on a 1 to 10 scale of how much did you feel like you trusted your partner this week, or how suspicious were you, or how much anxiety did you feel? 1, didn't trust at all, 10, totally trusted. And actually start measuring it and being like, am I rebuilding trust? Am I stuck at a 3? Or are there some weeks I move up to a 5? And what was different? And maybe it was you spent more quality time together, or you talked more that week, or your partner gave you their password on their phone, or whatever it is. And so that I like to shine a bright light on what people are uncomfortable about and don't want to talk about, because that is the only way you're going to get through things like this. And just that you build it as this time that you are always checking in, you're putting everything out on the table. For example, the transparency on the person that did cheat. Did they have any contact with the person they cheated with before, or anything like that? Did that person text them? Did they post on their Facebook page? Put all of that information out on the table and keep putting it out there and putting it out there. And it needs to be a safe space. If you want your partner to be honest with you and transparent, you can't freak out with everything that they say. You need to practice a lot of deep breathing and mindfulness and being like, okay, that's uncomfortable, but how do we as a team now approach this topic, instead of it being compartmentalized and that you're on opposite sides?
Can I ask like the reverse question of something we discussed before, which is we talked about, should you confront your spouse if you know that they're cheating? Well, what if you're the person who's doing the cheating? Should you disclose that to your spouse?
Great question.
Yeah, it's a really hard question too.
Sorry.
No, it's a good one. It's
question,
funny.
Tina.
Because usually I'm all about honesty and putting everything out on the table, but there have been a few times when I've talked to people, and there's been, maybe there's been a little. It depends on your intention and your motivation for sharing it. If you're doing it just to alleviate your guilt, that's not a great motivation. If you're doing it out of respect and integrity, and this was unfair to my partner, and we need to get back on track, and if it's, I think, coming from a place of love and strength and really wanting commitment to your marriage or relationship, then yes. However, I don't know, sometimes folks have shared things with me, when I'm one-on-one with them, maybe from their past or something like that, and I'm like, I don't know if it's worth bringing up now. It's, I don't know, it's a case-by-case basis. So.
Well, Chris, from the legal perspective, Tina had a really good question. Now, I will tell you, here in the South, a secret's not a secret unless you share it with someone else. Okay, but what do they do in Rhode Island? Should you tell your spouse?
Is that like in the law books? Is it?
Well, yeah. And what are the legal ramifications? I mean, do you get brownie points in front of the family court there in Rhode Island? I know what the answer is here. It depends on the judge. But in Rhode Island, would it be a good idea to come clean?
Brownie points.
What's that?
Why would you get brownie points for?
Well, because
you disclosed that you.
Do you mean as an attorney or for the client?
For the client, that is.
Okay, I don't think it would really get you too many brownie points for the client in front of the judge. But of course, as you said, it depends on the judge. Each judge is like night and day. You could present one case of infidelity in one courtroom and get one result. In the next courtroom, you get a completely different result. But I mean, once you come out, I mean, if there's no way of avoiding it, if there's absolutely no way of avoiding it whatsoever, it's hard to advise a client to make an admission that, in fact, they have had the infidelity and put them in a bad light. If there's no way of avoiding it, then from a legal perspective, not a moral issue or an ethical issue. I hear you, Dr. Jen. I'd rather be a sexologist, okay? You need somebody in your practice.
That sounds like a much more interesting job, by the way.
Yes, I agree completely.
We want to all be like flies on the wall in her office. We'll just sit there all day long.
Never boring.
Sometimes doing the right thing as a lawyer is extremely hard when you think of what the ramifications might mean for evidentiary concerns, etc. While I would like to think that most clients should come forward and want to come forward, maybe even if only to see whether or not there is still a chance for their relationship to survive. That's my personal thought on things. But legally, it depends on a case-by-case basis. In some instances, yes, if you come out with some judges, Stephen, you're right. We would gain some brownie points because there are some judges who say, okay, let's see, they were married for X number of years, and he was cheating for X number of years. What percentage is that of the whole? And that's the way we're going to figure out an equitable division of the assets. I think it's a very different way of doing things. I don't think I necessarily agree with parsing out a relationship that way, but it does happen. And one of the things that, as far as infidelity, that I wanted to bring up for this show, and I hope it doesn't get off topic too quickly, is where some of our judges in Rhode Island are actually bringing up that where there is no intercourse, if there is an infidelity of the heart via the internet, then it is still adultery.
Interesting. Interesting, because here in South Carolina, you have to show two things to prove adultery. You have to show inclination, and you have to show opportunity. Inclination being shown, like, for example, hey, I decided, even though I'm married, I'm going to join Match.com. Opportunity, yeah, well, Dr. Jen, Tina, it happens. Opportunity is you actually followed through. You met that person from Match.com, and you had an opportunity to spend private time with them. Absent that, South Carolina says, you may have a cheating heart, but there was no physical act of adultery. So that's interesting.
I didn't quite understand what Chris was saying. He said absent sex. Wait, if there's no sex in the marriage.
Like, Tina, if you and I were sexting each other or saying we love each other, and by the way, my wife's watching this broadcast, I have my ring on, I love you, Tina and I are friends. All right, so, but all right, Dr. Jen and I are sending love letters. Sorry.
You're just all over.
I know, it's getting worse, really.
He's really getting victimized here.
Yes. Dr. Jen and I are communicating and pouring our hearts out how much we care for each other long distance. Here in South Carolina, that wouldn't be adultery. But Chris, how about in Rhode Island?
Well, what I was talking about is a little bit different than case law or statute. I'm talking about how would the judges find it. And as
but I didn't understand what you meant. You were saying if there's no intercourse in the marriage, then stuff on the internet can be adultery. Do you mean if there is intercourse?
That's what I'm saying. That you pretty much hit it on the head. But what I'm saying is that there are some judges who would find that way. I'm not saying that the law says that in Rhode Island, either statutory or case law. What I'm saying is I've been before some judges, and they have taken the position that if you're on Facebook, and as Stephen says, if you're going back and forth with Dr. Jen, and you're saying, "Oh, sweetheart, I love you, etc. I want to be with you. I can't stand this old bat I'm with now." Honey, I love you. I do. But if you're doing that, then
yes.
Hey man, you can do a lot worse than Dr. Jen, a sexologist. Hey man, she's pretty. Anyway, whatever. We're not doing that.
I think I just got roped into a threesome here somehow.
Wait a minute. This broadcast is going on my website.
Did I finish?
Time out.
Chris, I think you're missing out here. That's all I'm gonna say.
I'm missing out. What did I miss?
Never mind.
No, but I'm saying that some judges would still find that to be adultery anyway.
Yeah. By the way, my wife has commented here. Made a comment. I told you she was watching.
Honey, I need my inhaler.
Doesn't watch anymore, so I'm in the clear.
So,
my husband doesn't watch, and he doesn't know any of my passwords. So he is never going to know this happened.
We might call that sketchy behavior, actually.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
One thing I wanted to kick out to you, which is sort of on topic, but I thought of here because there was some comment threads going among some of the audience members regarding violent behaviors by a spouse. Also, spouses who have history and tendencies of fabrication. You've got some conversations between Henry Lim and Christopher Vogelman and others, which brings me to some questions regarding the dynamics of what we're talking about when you're dealing with someone who might have a personality disorder. Dr. Jen, what are your thoughts on that? Because one of the things that I have seen is that it's one thing to be unfaithful in the marriage, you know, perhaps it's a 7-year itch or you've drifted apart, but in some of the relationships that I've seen in my office, there is a sort of a serial pattern to things, if you will, that seem to be driven by some form of personality disorder. And I'm playing armchair analyst here, you know, narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and so on. Dr. Jen, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and that's a totally different situation when you've got stuff like that going on. I mean, and because I'm a sociologist, not a psychologist, and with my specialty in relationships and gender and sex, I primarily get folks who you know don't necessarily have any sort of psychological label in terms of some sort of you know, mental instability in some way. So I mean, depression and anxiety, that's pretty common at this point, but otherwise I'm dealing with folks that, right, and because you could tell my approach is not antagonistic, my approach is vulnerability and honesty and trust and being responsible, and that's not going to work in some contexts, and there's real fear of, you know, if there's real fear that somebody's going to lash out at you or go crazy or hurt you or something like that, then, you know, a lot of my advice does not apply. And, I mean, if you're already in a context like that and have those worries, that's probably a relationship, you know, you need to distance yourself from or start getting out of, and definitely have professional advice, both from, you know, therapists or counselors and or lawyers of what's going on or how to handle a situation like that. So that's a very different, much more complicated and more. It depends on what the issue are, that you know whether it's a liar or something like that. But yeah, what the specific topics are that you've been addressing with your partner.
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
Can I ask? I wanted to ask the question of how do you kind of touched on it with the levels of trust and rating and everything, but we had discussed before the show, just in general, how do you help people overcome infidelity who want to stay, you know, in their marriage?
There's two main things to break it down. So the person that's cheated, the person that's done the cheating, couple things that they need to work on is, like I said, transparency and honesty, and talking about contact that they've had with people and just putting it all out there and just really practicing that. Even if they're afraid they're going to hurt their partner or their partner's going to freak out, they need to practice that over and over again. And they need to stop compartmentalizing and they need to, you know, bring their whole life and their integrity and their word into one big picture and not compartmentalize anymore. And to practice that, and then often practice stating their needs and requesting their needs in new ways that they haven't done before, or they stopped doing because they didn't feel like they were being met. They need to practice that on the other side of the person that's been hurt, betrayed, cheated on, rebuilding trust. And specifically because some folks who have been cheated on say they want to work on their relationship and stay in it, but they also want to keep like the upper hand of always feeling like they have the trump card of like, but you cheated on me, and so I can flip out on you. I can, you know, you've got no, you know, you can't have any secrets. You can't keep anything from me. I could follow you if I want. I could do everything. That's not good, right? That's not going to rebuild your marriage and your relationship. So there needs to be an aspect of that person in building their trust. They need to literally every day say, if I'm gonna choose to be in this marriage and work on it, am I gonna take a step towards trusting? Am I gonna learn how to sit with my anxiety and my insecurities? Am I literally gonna learn how to breathe into them and not just feel like I've got the right to throw all of that on my partner whenever I want to? Because that's not gonna work for anybody. So, does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. I was just, yes, that's.
She was taking notes.
No, I wasn't. I was kind of, no, never mind. I was just thinking about where we were going next with the questions, and unfortunately, I can't see the comment tracker. But anyway, no, that sounded great.
I know where we're going next. We're going into a little segment that we call cross-examination. Now it's personal because we have about 9 minutes left. Tina, shall I swear them in?
Absolutely, yes.
All right, well, Chris may have seen this segment. Dr. Jen, we're catching you off guard, but in any event, I need both of you to raise your right hands and do you swear to tell the truth, so help you Google?
I do.
All right?
I do.
All right. Now, Dr. Jen, for you, I'll let you in. This is a part where Tina will ask a question and I'll ask a question. It could be about anything other than your Social Security number or your debit card PIN number. So I'll turn it over to Tina to ask of you or Chris. Tina, what do you have for him today?
Oh, man, I didn't even think we were going to get to this section.
Oh, you want me to go first?
Yeah, no, I thought we were going to be so involved in this topic that we would just go the whole hour. And I mean, no, you go ahead.
Okay, all right. So, Dr. Jen, you're going to get a free pass. I'm going to go over to Chris, see how I had you on the hook, and then moved over to Chris. All right, Chris. You know what my question is? My question is, because we all have one, if we've been practicing law long enough, and you'd have to dig back several episodes to see my most embarrassing moment told or hear it told on air. What is your most embarrassing moment as a lawyer? That could be in the courtroom, that could be on the courthouse steps, that could be in the conference room. Most embarrassing moment.
The first case I ever had as a lawyer. It was a defaulted divorce hearing before a judge, and I had the unfortunate privilege of having a sinus infection and a double ear infection. I could hear virtually nothing. I went into the courtroom, and I was standing there as the case was called up, and I was getting ready to motion to my client to come up, and the judge said something, and I didn't hear it. And then the judge, I said, "Sorry, Judge, I didn't hear you." And the judge said, "What are you, deaf?" And I said, "No, Your Honor, I've got it." "Well, I don't care." He said, and he thought that he said it clear enough. He said, "Your client is doing shots in the courtroom." I said, "My client is doing shots in the courtroom. That's what I heard." I said, "Judge, I'm pretty sure I didn't see him carry in any alcohol whatsoever when he came into the courtroom." The judge looked at me like I'm a dumb twit. And he goes, "No, Mr. Pearsall, no." He said, "Your client, and the shots in the courtroom." I look back at the client. I'm looking at him. He's not tossing any shots back. I'm like, "Judge, I didn't even see him do any shots in the courtroom." He goes, "No, Mr. Pearsall, no." He gets off the bench. He walks down. He's going like this. he's going like this down to his robe. He's saying, "Your client is wearing shorts in a courtroom." He said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Pearsall, if my accent gives you a problem." He said,
That's a good one. That's a good one.
so, needless to say, he humiliated me the rest of the hearing, but that was good enough, and that was my cousin Chris moment.
Nice.
Well, I have a question for Dr. Jen. Do you like get invited to every? I mean, you must be like the most popular person you know. Like, do you get invited to every party and everyone wants to talk to you about? I mean, we've really gotten into it. I saw you on an earlier HOA, and her topic then was how to rekindle your sex life and everything, and it was very interesting. It was great. But do you get asked about this like after hours?
Yeah, and I do have a lot of friends that I'll have a little gathering of friends or something like that, and then they'll be like, "So this is Dr. Jen. This is the sex one I was telling you about," and all their friends will be like, "Oh my God, I heard about you," or I watched your podcast show," and they're like, and then we launch into it. So pretty much everywhere, whether I'm in a bar, at a cocktail party, at a professional event, which is great because a lot of my motivation and my passion is creating safe spaces for people to talk about what they're afraid of being judged about, or what they have misinformation around or confused around. So I never get tired of talking about these topics. I mean, I'm not thrilled, if somebody, while I'm out like really drinking and then partying or whatever, and they really want to get serious, because I was like, you're just not going to get good advice from me, especially if you're not paying me and I'm drinking. Like, East Coast Jen's going to come out. I'm like, all right, you want my answer? All right, let's cut through the bullshit, Here's. It's not going to be the most tactful advice.
Well, I have this vision, Dr. Jen, of you at a party looking at all your friends going, "Can we talk about something other than sex?" Everybody going totally quiet, and then you going, "Nah, just kidding."
Just kidding.
Just kidding.
That's true. They would be shocked if I said that. It's true.
That is so funny.
What else do we talk about at parties?
Well, Jen, do you consult with people like throughout the country? And like, I've seen your Dr. Jen's Den, and I've seen your website, which, by the way, everyone should go visit. You have like a ton of videos and everything, but are you kind of like nationwide, or are you sort of practice focused right where you're living in like California, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in San Diego. No, I have Skype clients around the country.
Oh wow,
So,
okay.
And the main thing, I mean, that I'm an educator at heart, and like I said, creating safe spaces and talking about what's not being talked about, and challenging people in that way and building skills. So like public speaking and getting out and speaking everywhere I can from. I was actually recently in Columbia, South Carolina, for the university there has an annual condom fashion show, which I was impressed that South Carolina had that.
Yes, they do.
I know. So I was the MC for it this year in early March,
wow.
and did sexual health education for it. And the costumes that the students created out of condoms were amazing, and how they tied it to sexual health education. So so I'm also,
and it ended up making the news and being all controversial as well.
This year or in past years?
This year, as a matter of fact.
Oh, you'll have to send me that stuff. I want to see
I'll
it.
have to send you that story. Because this is South Carolina, and let's just say we're not the most liberal or progressive state out there. So
I know. That's why I can't believe it's been going on for 7 years. So I hope I didn't do anything that wrecks that
I don't
annual
remember
tradition.
your name. I don't remember you.
Okay, good.
So that's good. That's
Good.
I'm sorry, Tina.
Chris? You want to go? Well, I was going to just ask Chris. Like, I don't know much about what he does outside of practicing law, and I was just wondering, like, what are your hobbies? What do you do on weekends that makes you happy?
Silence.
You stumped him on that one.
Okay, let's see. Outside of practicing law, well, I suppose at this point it's Google Plus, learning about HOAs.
Oh my God!
Oh, Chris, that's sad.
It is.
Yeah, you really.
It is. Let's see. My dogs. I've got my dogs. I have 3 Chihuahuas.
Oh wow!
I like to walk them.
Mhm. Yeah, I guess the weather has gotten better, so now you've got springtime weather for walking them.
Yeah. But other than that, most of it is just learning things online, internet marketing, etc. That's just. I think I was a man born out of time. I think I should have been born in this era when I could have absorbed all this stuff much better, rather than being the age I am now and trying to absorb it.
Well,
Yeah.
Chris, now you've got the URL to drjensden.com, so you have something else to do with your weekend.
I already got her bookmarked.
So that's all good. I'm going to go check a few out. So anyway, y'all, we have reached the hour here, 5 o'clock. It's not as if anybody's kicking us off, but I will instead. Tina, do you want me to give the shout out to Rocket Matter, or will you do the honors?
Yes, you can do that.
I can do the honors? Okay. Well, once again, we'd like to give a shout out to Rocket Matter, which is the leading cloud-based law practice management solution for small to mid-sized firms. If you're interested in learning more, visit rocketmatter.com. I've gotten good at that, haven't I?
Yes, you have.
Thank you. I've gotten pretty good.
Doesn't even sound recited.
And listen, Dr. Jen, Chris, y'all been wonderful. Really enjoyed this program and hearing about these issues regarding infidelity, cheating, and so on, both from the psychological or practical side of things, if you will, and the legal side. So I wanted to thank you both very much for being on the show today, for taking the time to do that.
Thank you. This was fun.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah, thanks for me too.
Hey.
I thought this was an awesome show. I think we could have kept talking for another,
For sure.
quite another hour.
Hours.
I mean, fascinating.
Can I do a shameless plug?
Absolutely.
Okay. I'd like to give a shout out to eZine Articles. If you could see that,
wow.
eZinearticles.com for sending me the free mug. They didn't sponsor me or anything, but I figured I didn't get to see the Rocket Matter mug, so I'm going to do my own.
Okay. We should get mugs for our practices.
Oh, hold on one second.
Showing something.
Tina, hold on. I have a special friend here. Oh, my goodness. My wife Kelsey and I do possum rescues with Keepers of the Wild, okay? And this is a baby possum, and they are awesome.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe they let you.
Thought you might want to see one live. This one doesn't look so happy, but they're actually pretty gentle.
He's so tame. Wow.
Well, we don't handle them very long because then they'll become accustomed to human beings. We want them to be afraid of other folks. But anyway, he's making his little cameo, be with us for a few weeks, and
Why do you have to rescue them?
we haven't named them yet.
Why did you have to rescue them? They weren't okay just living in the wild, or they didn't have their mother, or what?
You would be amazed at how many of these are rescued every year. There's a organization in South Carolina called Keeper of the Wild, and it's about preservation and conservation for South Carolina wildlife. It could be anything from waterfowl to birds of prey to marsupials like our little friend here, you name it. So anyway, I made a post earlier if you wanted to learn more about possums. We're not trying to turn this into the possum show. It's like show and tell on. We were talking about sex and possums. Isn't that great?
Oh, dangerous combination.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right. I'm sorry, Tina. I interrupted you totally, but it was a possum.
No, that's. Hey, I had nothing else. That's great. That's awesome.
All right. Well, listen, everyone. Tina, unless you have anything else, I'm going to end the broadcast. I wanted to thank all of our supporters for Legally Speaking. I'm not sure exactly what we have going on next week, but...
Well, I did just want to say, because next week is Memorial Day, we'll be taking a break, and then we will have a show, 2 weeks. So 2 weeks from today.
Okay.
So,
Sounds
happy
good.
Memorial Day to everyone. Happy early Memorial Day, and thanks you guys for coming on, and hopefully we'll have you back sometime. It was awesome.
It was a pleasure. Thanks, Tina and Stephen.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. And goodbye, everyone. Have a wonderful Memorial Day, and we'll see you after that.